Hello and welcome to another video. This video will teach you how to evaluate your articles and see how strong or credible your articles are. As a lesson preview, this lesson will cover first the different types of articles, second we'll talk about the credibility of those articles, and third we will talk about author qualifications. So first let's talk about the different types of articles that are available on the internet. The first type of article is a meta-study. A meta-study is oftentimes the most credible type of article that you can ever find because they are studies that take into account other studies that are on the literature. These studies are also known as studies about studies, and what these studies do is that they get data from a large amount of studies that talk about the similar thing, and they compile that data onto one study and they meta-analyze it and see what kind of facts or conclusions that they can deduce from that. The second type of article is a peer-reviewed study. Although this isn't not as credible as a meta-study, it's still a really good study because it's oftentimes looked over by other authors and scholars that are highly credible, and with more and more people looking over your article, you are able to ensure that your article is truly credible and it's relaying the correct and right information. The third type of article that you should probably find on the internet are think tank articles. These articles are helpful because they're essentially from websites or sources that are willing to write a lot about a topic, and they have a lot of authors that are essentially putting their brains together and writing about a similar topic. Some examples of think tanks are the Brookings Institution and the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. If you're ever looking for articles, try to look for these sources because they oftentimes have articles that are written in think tanks or essentially institutions that have a lot of knowledge and information about a certain topic. And the fourth type of article that you should try to find are newspaper articles. A lot of these newspaper articles try to relate the correct and politically right information, sometimes politically unbiased, so objective articles that only relay the fact. A lot of these newspaper articles are good, and an example of them is NPR, BBC, Politico. Another one that isn't listed is Reuters. Reuters is good because it doesn't have any opinion, but rather only talks about the facts of a certain event that has happened in current times. The second thing that we'll talk about today is the credibility of these articles. How do you assess an article's credibility? The first way that you can do that is by checking the cited by option. If you go to Google Scholar, then you would be able to see how many people cited your article, and the more people that cited your article means that it's very popular among the literature, and a lot of people have read that article and see that it's good enough to include in their own studies. And it also tests if an article is common in the literature. For example, if you type healthcare in the Google Scholar search bar and the first article that pops up has like 500 cited by entries, that means that that article is very common in the literature and a lot of people are reading it. So that means that the article is pretty credible and it's pretty informational. The second type of test that you can see how credible an author or article is checking the footnotes or endnotes. If you check out the PDF of a certain article, then you would be able to scroll down, and in between different pages, there would be a bunch of citations or essentially qualifications of different sources that the author used. The more footnotes an article has, that means that that author was willing to put in the time to essentially seek out information from other sources, meaning that their article is not only containing a lot of good information, but it essentially has a wide variety of sources to prove their claim. That means that their articles are very credible because it shows where an article gets their information and tells us that that article or the claim that that person is making is something that's very common among other people as well. The third type of test is looking at the works cited page. While a lot of newspaper articles or PDFs don't actually have works cited pages, there are some educational or scholarly articles that have a works cited page. It's not that too big of a waste of time to check the works cited page because oftentimes those works cited pages have a list of really credible articles that you could potentially draw more information from, or you can see whether or not an article was willing to cite other articles and essentially make the claims that other people were making, but in a more compiled fashion. And lastly, how to determine an article is strong or not, we'll look at the author qualifications. The first author or person that has written an article that is very credible is oftentimes a PhD or professor. These people are very educated about a certain topic and they're really knowledgeable about the different types of things that they're talking about, which means that if you get an article that is cited or written by someone that is a PhD or a professor, that would mean that they are very well knowledge and you found a really good article. The second type of person that would write an article that is the second most qualified, or in my opinion, or credible, is a correspondent or news reporter. If you're ever looking on the news or news websites, you would try to find people that are generally news reporters that most of the time relays fact-based information to the reader. This is not always the case if they're really biased, but for some news sources like Reuters, a lot of the news reporters and correspondents are really good at relaying the objective fact, and so you can pull that information because it's not biased. And the last type of a writer that you should keep in mind when researching your articles is a freelance writer. A freelance writer could be very credible in that they could be a PhD or professor, but they could also be a regular person that is writing on a blog. So you would always want to be careful on what kind of writer your freelance writer is. For example, they could be someone that writes independently, and the different works that they can do is that they could blog, review, or even interview other people. It depends on what type of interviews or what type of reviews these are, but most of the time, if they're blogs or reviews about something silly or funny about the news, they are probably not credible because they are writing in a blog website, which isn't really credible compared to other big news websites. So if you're looking at a freelance writer, always make sure to check their qualifications and see if they are a correspondent for another news company or even a very educational person like a professor or has a PhD. Thank you for watching this video, and I hope you learned a lot about checking the credibility and the qualifications of your different articles so you can evaluate the strength of your articles with ease.